Well, so hey, David T. Something that I've never had happen to me, knock on wood, is to lose an engine in flight, but you have, and your family was on board. So tell me about that.
That's right, Warren. First of all, thanks for having me on Pilot Lounge today. I really appreciate it. You know, we often train for things like this, and you know, you're supposed to think it'll happen to you, but of course, in the back of our mind, we're thinking it will never happen to me. But I'm here to tell you that all of that training, everything that we do to just jump right on that, you know, we have an engine out situation, all that comes into play. So definitely take it from Dave T, train for this engine out procedure, and get ready to do it. So I've got a little story, yes, and my family was on board.
Okay, so you were flying from where to where, and
okay.
What happened?
All right, so I'll take you through it real quick. So as you can tell, you know that I'm from Atlanta. You can tell from my southern accent. The folks who listen to Hangar Talk can tell that I'm from Georgia. So I learned to fly at Peachtree DeKalb Airport in Atlanta, and I had a Mooney, an M20F model. It's a pretty nice airplane, single engine, 4-seater, low wing, if you're not familiar with the model. And I had my wife and daughter on board. My wife, Lisa, and my daughter, Lauren. Lauren was 19 months old. She was an infant. She was still in a car seat. And so Warren, I bought this airplane a few months before that. I took it to the best place on the East Coast for pre-flight, okay, up near Philadelphia. Then I took it to the best place in the Southeast for an annual inspection. And this is a key factor, I was adamant about putting shoulder harnesses in, adamant. Airplane, it was a 1967 F model Mooney, and it didn't come with shoulder harnesses, and this factors into the story. So I went flying with my wife and daughter. We were going to visit my wife's very sick father. We're in Shreveport, Louisiana, and that was the perfect mission for this airplane. So Lisa and Lauren and I took off on Labor Day weekend. This is back in 2004. And it was a beautiful day, Warren, beautiful. Now, that was back when we had handheld GPSs that weren't quite as sophisticated as we have now. But I plotted a pretty good course. I'm a VFR pilot, had flight following. You know, I had a chart open, you know, a paper chart, which is kind of rare. But I had a chart open. We're flying along in this Mooney. New shoulder harnesses, mind you. And also, we had started, let me back up a quick sec. During the pilot briefing, you know, I said to my wife, Lisa, said, hey, you know, 2 exits on this airplane, here they are, and if we ever get an emergency situation, what I want you to do is, you know, tie your seatbelt up, and then, you know, unlatch the door and crack the door open a little bit, and then if we have an emergency, I'll hand you Lauren, and then, you know, you get out of the airplane, then I'll get out and shut things down. Never thought it'd come to that, you know. So
now you've got Lauren belted in the back seat, right?
Lauren is in a child seat, belted in the back seat, and Warren, by gosh, I cranked that airplane up, and I just didn't feel right about how she was belted in. I turned it off and redid the seat belts around her baby carrier. You know, it was just I don't know if it was premonition or what. Anyway, so we're flying along. It's a beautiful day. Beautiful blue sky day. It was at 10,500 feet, and I was like following I-20 basically west from Atlanta generally, but I was a little bit south of I-20. And folks who fly in the southeast might know there's a lot of pine trees and a lot of scrub and forest and stuff, but usually there's a ton of private airfields. And I was in an area that was like no man's land with no private airfields. And I was just following along on my, you know, sectional, and I had a little handheld Garmin 196, black and white GPS. So all of a sudden the engine started running rough in this Mooney. And I'm kind of like, you know, a little too far to turn around to the last airport that was behind me, and a little bit too far to make it to Jackson airport in Mississippi, which was a waypoint, and the engine was starting to run really rough, and I already had flight following, so I, you know, let ATC know I had a rough running engine. They came back and said, okay, 9708 Mike, let us know what we can do. And I said stand by, and I went through the normal checks, you know, gas on fullest tank, mixture rich, you know, looked around to see if there was anything else that I missed, a propeller, you know, everything seemed fine. Power was getting to electricity was getting to the engine. The mags were on. I was filling with that. All this happened in the space of about a minute. Okay. And then all of a sudden the engine just went, and it was running rough, like the airplane was shaking. And so the engine just went pow. And then the airplane started moving violently left and right and really vibrating, And then the next thing I knew, there was smoke coming into the cockpit. And so I pushed the transmit button on the microphone to ATC and declared an emergency at exactly the minute my wife Lisa had put her headset back on because she was sleeping. So all of a sudden she puts her headset on and she's like, "Here's 9708 Mike, we're declaring an emergency. Smoke entering into the cockpit." And so back in the day, that's when we had these pagers that had like alphanumeric pages, kind of like the predecessor for an iPhone. Right. But they had paged apparently all the sheriff's deputies and people on the ground, single engine airplane, smoking cockpit, emergency. And so then, Warren, what I did was I went through the same kind of procedure that I normally would would normally do to kind of go through the flow. And is there something I missed? I was trying to think. First concern, Warren, was the smoke in the cockpit. I really couldn't see out of the airplane. And we're going and booking along pretty fast. And even though the little pilot's window said do not open above like 150, knots or something, and I was like, I don't care how fast we're going.
That noise, they're going to open the window.
Exactly. I opened that little pilot's window, and the next thing I did was basically pitched for best glide. It was in my head what it was, pitching for best glide. I knew that there was a major issue. And so there was no hesitation on that. And I will say that Dave Hirschman, my good buddy, who is also my flight instructor back in Atlanta, he and Josh, I think, had a nice little rule of thumb about what is the best glide attitude. Mm-hmm. We had that on AOPA Live. It's actually pretty cool. So anyway, I was pitched for best glide, and I was in touch with ATC, losing altitude. And I told my wife Lisa, I said, "Lisa, listen, the things that we talked about earlier that we're talking about during our pre-flight, this actually is happening for real. So I'll keep you posted, but just bear with me." And so I talked to ATC, and Warren, I was losing altitude probably about 500 feet a minute or so, or maybe a little bit more. So I was down to 9,500 feet in the scope of a minute and a half or so. And I knew by looking at my handheld GPS that I was like 23 miles before my next waypoint, which is Jackson International Airport in Jackson, Mississippi, the metropolis, and I was about 21 miles from the airport behind me. And a Mooney glides at about 2 miles, per 1,000 feet, and I knew I was going to just miss it both ways. So it was like no way to hit an airport back that way, no way to hit one that way. As I got closer, and I asked ATC, I said, "Hey, can you vector me to the nearest airport with services?" Now, this is a phrase that I just came up with in my own mind. I don't really know what it means, but what I was thinking was, my airplane's on fire. I want to land somewhere with fire trucks. I just didn't know. And I'll tell you why there were smoke in the cockpit later. Obviously, I was able to do it because we're talking. Tried to block things out of my mind with Lisa and with Lauren, and I knew that I could land the airplane because I heard Dave Hirschman's voice in my head saying, "Dave T, you could land this airplane. You can do it. You could land it." It was like he was right there with me, and that's important to have a mentor and to have that reinforcement. Right. I just had a flight lesson with Dave on that Friday, and this was like a Sunday. So things are kind of fresh in my mind. And I just got the airplane had just got a annual inspection. There were new shock donuts and things like that. So I knew I could land the airplane. I just had to land it once, So I really didn't know what was wrong with the engine, but it definitely did not come back online. So then ATC said I couldn't see the panel because things were shaking so badly. And even when I pulled the mixture full lean, it did not shut down the engine. It was like the propeller was still windmilling, and airplane was still chugging along until I got much slower, and then finally the propeller stopped in a vertical orientation. But so when I asked where the nearest airport was with services, the ATC said, "Yeah, turn right 20 degrees and it's like, some field off in Mississippi. And I looked at my sectional. I said, well, that's on the other side of a lake, and 9708 Mike is a glider right now. So we will not be flying over a lake. And that was like the smartest sentence I'd uttered, in my life up to that point, other than saying I do, of course, when I married Lisa. But I did have the presence of mind to think, I've got passengers. I don't want to fly over water, with no power. And so I saw that there was a double lane highway. And so I told ATC that I intended to land on the highway. And they said something to the effect of, well, will that be U.S. Highway, 64? And I said, if that's what you're calling it, that's what it's going to be, But I could see that there was, and so this is up for debate, Warren. Should pilots elect to land on a road or in the woods, or not on a road in another area, a field or something? So here's the thing. This is still a hotly debated topic, and at the time that this occurred with me, shortly thereafter, there actually was a write-up in a local safety magazine that seemed to indicate that the decision could be either way. Could go, yes, it could be good for a highway. No, it could be not good if you're on a highway. And I see it both ways. I was with my family, and so I elected to land on this highway. It looked like it was a rural road, and it didn't look like there were that many obstructions. Now, if I was in the middle of downtown,
two-lane highway,
divided two-lane highway, two lanes on each direction. Now, if I was in the middle of Atlanta, no. If I was in the middle of another metropolitan area, I don't think so. But it was more rural, and it gave me some options. And like I said, ironically, there were no private fields near there, and I could have definitely landed in grass. That would have been fine. So if Lisa and Lauren were with me, I might have had a different decision. So I wanted to bring that up for discussion as people think about this. There's the yin and the yang for it. The other thing is that, so I committed to a landing on this divided road, and now we are descending, under best glide towards this road, and everything is happening in like slow motion, you would think, but it's really happening kind of quick. We don't have that much time, to deal with it. So Lisa was pretty calm about it, and I asked her later, why she was so calm, and she said, well, David, because you were calm, it calmed me down too. So that's another takeaway. Let's just do it by the book, see what we can do. So anyway, we got close to this highway, and I said, Lisa, okay, and we're about 2,000 feet now above the road, and I said, Lisa, go ahead and open your door, crack your door, and open it a little bit, and look down and tell me what you see as far as traffic is concerned. Okay. And so she's like, okay. So she cracks the door open and she looks out and she said, well, there's like this white RV mobile home, on the road. And I said, well, we're going about 100. They're going about 60. So we'll land in front of them. And then we're down to about 1,000 feet now. So I was getting ready to get configured for landing in front of this RV mobile home, seriously thinking, we're going a little bit faster than they are. And so we'll land in front of them and not, and they'll be behind us. So I got it set up for that. And then, and I'm not saying I'm a great pilot. That's not the takeaway, but I even surprised myself, and folks might, if they're in this situation, I think you'll rise to the occasion. So what I did was I came in, and as we got closer, Warren, I noticed that there were traffic lights, going over the road, and wires and stuff. And so I waited till the last minute. I came in over one set of traffic lights and then snatched my landing gear down. It was a manual Johnson bar,
right?
So it happened really quick. I didn't have to wait for electricity or anything. So I snatched it down and locked it into place before the next set of traffic lights. It even impressed my own self that I could do it. But, so we did it. And so now we're, taxiing up this road going about 90, or 80 going up this road. And like it was meant to be, all of a sudden, the traffic light was green for me. The traffic was stopped on either side. And then Lisa goes, oh, thank the Lord, thank the Lord. And then Warren the light changed to red for me, and people started going back and forth. And now I'm going like 65, approaching an intersection.
Oh
I mean,
goodness.
there's nothing I could do. So, and I couldn't jog to the right a little bit more because there was an embankment and a yield sign and a gas station. And this is all coming up pretty quick. At the very last second, the intersection cleared except for a pickup truck, and they stopped just off to the left side. And I jogged to the right, but about a foot in on my left wing, I hit the back of the pickup. And we spun into 360 and stopped just outside that intersection. It was like a NASCAR stop or something. It was that quick. And so, excuse me, but everybody was okay. And because we had shoulder harnesses, I wasn't injured, Lisa wasn't injured, and Lauren wasn't injured. People started running to us from, of course, I shut the airplane down, opened the door. Lisa got out, handed her Lauren, and exited the airplane as a funnel of people came towards us. And the pickup truck driver took off, just left. I was like, why would someone leave like that? They just left. So the pickup driver took off. We're out on the ground, and then the sheriff's deputies were there. And the FAA had a representative nearby because Jackson Airport was very close. They had someone nearby, and I told them what happened. And really, just from that afternoon on, people said, "You did the right thing, son. You did exactly the right thing, and your training kicked in, and there was not much else you can do." So here's what happened, and this is another key takeaway. Oh, did you want to know where the pickup driver went?
No.
So we're pushing the airplane off the. Well, I'm pushing the airplane off the road. A guy stops to help me push the airplane off the road, and he turns out that he's an A&P at Jackson Airport in Mississippi, and it was his son that I hit in the pickup truck. So the dad calls the son on the phone and says, "Get your butt back over here. Like, what are you doing?" And it turned out that the son had just got his driver's license. He was 17, and he's like, they interviewed him on TV, and he said, "Hey, man, I just got my license, and the first accident I have, it was an airplane that hit me." So it's a little bit of comic relief there out of a very serious situation. But here's what happened on the airplane, and if you don't mind, I want our listeners and our viewers to really take note of this because this is serious. In that airplane, on that Lycoming IO360 engine, there are these 4 through bolts that go in and hold the cylinders from one side to the other. And at some point during that airplane engine's existence, a cylinder had been removed and put back on, and another one had been removed and put back on as the engine was in the airplane. This is a very common thing to do. And so savvy aviator Mike Bush recently wrote a story about this, and folks could check it out at AOPA.org in the March Pilot Savvy Maintenance column. And so here's the thing. One of the through bolts on the airplane, Warren, had cracked on its shaft. Like if it was a pencil, it cracked a little bit, but it hadn't totally separated. Okay? And the airplane picked that moment for both of those pieces of that bolt to separate and come out. And when it did that, the FAA guy on the ground said, "Son, it's like a zipper when that happened." The other 8 bolts around the cylinder head go pop, 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 and that's what happened. The cylinder had separated from the engine block about 4 or 5 inches. The smoke I had in the cockpit was the oil pouring onto the hot exhaust manifold. Right. So that could have been a serious fire situation. And the takeaway was this for the through bolts, okay? And this is what Mike Bush brings up. I went to a Mooney, basically a Mooney convention about a month or so after that, okay? And I asked one of the Mooney specialists, Don Maxwell, in Texas, I said, "Hey, Don, like when you rebuild an engine or do engine work, like do you replace the through bolts?" And he said, "Well, not really. Not normally. We don't really replace the through bolts. They're about $100 each. They're big, and we just don't do it." And so, and he said, but you told me your story. He goes, from now on, I'll pretty much seriously consider replacing those 3 bolts from here on out. And Don's an expert. I mean, if you know anything about Mooney's, you would have heard about Don Maxwell. But it seems to be common that during field maintenance and field overhauls that these bolts are not replaced. And Mike Bush has a pretty doggone interesting take on all this, on the way that there's a certain amount of flex in the bolts that you have to torque it down to exactly right to take the flex out of it. And it's just hard to do with cowling and baffling and things like that. So I want viewers, to pay attention to something like this. If they have an engine and they're having some field work done, and it's not uncommon to replace the cylinder, that is very common, to really think about that. So that's a key takeaway.
Good takeaway.
For me, real quick, the shoulder harnesses for an older airplane, that's a key thing to have. Go ahead and get those in there. There's plenty of STCs for things like that. And know your checklist right off the bat, and remain calm. So there's a couple of takeaways from all this.
Right. Okay. Now, most important question.
Yes.
Did Lisa fly with you again?
No, she did not. In fact, no. So here's the thing, and now my daughter has, and my daughter's a pretty good stick. So Lisa hasn't flown with me, and here's why. And she has a good reason for this. She said, "Hey, Dave T, you took your airplane to the best place on the East Coast to get a pre-purchase inspection, and you took it to the best place in the Southeast to get your annual inspection. And they did a real thorough job. It was well done. And even still, you have to manage that risk." So in her mind, it's a hard thing to get over. Now, here's the takeaway from my perspective. Lightning rarely strikes twice, Warren. So I think, now I'm pretty paranoid about the engine out situation, but I don't think it happens very often to a lot of us more than once.
Yeah.
So I've been predisposed to have already had that scenario. So I'm hoping that the odds are with me this time.
So now I have another question for you.
Yeah.
After all of this, did you go play the lottery?
Oh yeah, man, definitely. We got to Louisiana and I played the lottery. Definitely, I bought a lottery card. But in fact, I was just thinking of one other thing, and this is like another cool thing to think about. Actually, 2 more things, if you don't mind.
Sure.
One thing from an insurance perspective, I had recently read my insurance policy, and the policy said not to talk to the press and the media. And of course, in Flowood, Mississippi. This is like a very small suburb of Jackson. That's big news on Labor Day weekend. So the newspaper was out there, and I was a newspaper, editor at the time, photo editor, and I was pretty reticent to talk about this while the sheriff's deputies were around and while the FAA was there and all. And the reason is, as a pilot, we don't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know whose fault it was. Was it Dave T's fault? Or the airplanes, or who knows, So I didn't want to say anything, and I'd read the policy that suggested to play it safe, don't say anything. Now, a local newspaper photographer said that she knew another sports news editor friend of mine, and so I gave her just a little bit of, the smallest minute amount of details, and she used that and called it in, and there was enough information to help that story along. But I told her for all the pertinent details to talk to the sheriff's deputy. He's standing right there. The 17-year-old was in, who I hit. His truck that I hit. He was interviewed on TV. It was there were some lighter moments to it. The white RV mobile home. So I called up about a month later to get the tape on the local news. And because I had Lauren cradled in my arms and Lisa was in the background and the airplane was over there. And so when I called the news station, I said, "Yeah, I was in this airplane, incident over on the highway." And the lady goes, "Was that you that landed in front of George?" And I was like, "Well, who's George?" And she said, "Well, he was driving a white RV mobile home. We were coming back from the lake, So it was pretty comical. She was real sweet. I did get a copy of the tape. But there were so many things that came together to make that an event that we could talk about.
Yeah.
And then they have some lessons from it versus a very tragic event, because it could have gone that way too.
So I know some folks are going to want to know if you had any kind of hassle from FAA or NTSB about this.
I'm glad you asked that question, because I was really worried about that. My logbooks were up to date. My airplane logbooks were up to date too, but I was worried about that. I was a new pilot. I had about 360 hours or so on me, and a decent amount in retractable time, for that low amount of hours. But I was worried about that. But I didn't surrender my logbooks that day, nor was I asked to. And I believe that it's within our right as a pilot to provide them. Should we be asked? And no one asked me for them that day. But I was in touch with the FAA, and they did request that I come down to the FISTO in Atlanta near Hartsfield Airport, and my heart was just pounding, man.
Oh yeah.
But I sat down with them, and I had my documents, and basically said, okay, so what happened? And I told them. And they were the FAA and the NTSB as well were actually more concerned with the technical aspects of what happened to the engine than with what I did. There was no action taken against me at all. In fact, they patted me on the back and said, "Son, good job. You did right." They echoed the words on the scene. Hey, you did everything that you could have done. And I just thank my training, my instructor for that. But no, it worked out fine for me. It was no issue. The airplane could have probably been repaired. The wing in a Mooney is a one-piece wing, and it goes through the cockpit, and there are these cockpit fuselage, roll tube. It's like a construction like a NASCAR car, and it got tweaked a little bit to the side. And the airplane could have actually been repaired and straightened out, but I elected not to do that. I just had a weird feeling about it and felt like I should move on. We did end up renting a car that day to go to visit my ailing father-in-law. He did get to see my daughter, Lauren. We did have a good trip and everything by car. When I went to get another airplane, which it took about a year to find one, what do you think I looked for?
Another Mooney, I would assume. Exactly,
man. I was like, man, this thing took a licking and kept on ticking, basically. It's like, I want another one just like that, So I got another Mooney. It was a different model, but I was really impressed with the construction of it. And I mean, hitting the back of a pickup at about 65 is pretty severe, not to make light of it. And unfortunately, there were no injuries on the ground either, to be quite honest with you. And it just ended up being a little bit of a comical situation, but it could have gone the other way. But so that's another takeaway, something that you mentioned. Don't be afraid to chat with the FAA and present what you have. I had nothing to hide. I felt like I did everything I could. I just wanted to help other people. And in my situation, there's an NTSB report on this. They had the engine for a year. And the main thing was it a defective part? Because that would have affected other people that flew behind that IO360.
And did they conclude that the part was defective, or just had been overstressed, or what?
It was either overstressed or understressed, Warren, and that remains a mystery right now. But looking back at this NTSB report, and you and I look at these often because we deal with the Air Safety Institute. We provide a lot of video for a lot, for the stories that we do. And we also help our brethren at ASI, and I read these things all the time, and just going back and looking at it is pretty doggone scary to me, because it's there in black and white, and it's something that you don't want to see. But, am I Joe Stud Pilot? No, hell no. But you know what? I think that our training kicks in, and having that recent training and having Dave Hirschman's voice in my ear really provided that mentorship and that stability to me. to know that I could do that, because that's a scary situation with your family, you know.
Oh, absolutely. So, anything you would have done differently, looking back at it?
Well, um, you know, I think it probably, I think the outcome was as best as it could have been, given that situation. What could I have done differently? You know, I don't know that there is anything I could have done differently. And as I look back over the NTSB reports, like I said, in black and white, the smoke entering the cockpit and things like that. I mean, I did declare Mayday. That. Here's another thing. Don't be afraid to declare an emergency. My goodness. The insurance company owns the airplane at that point, Warren. That's not that big a deal, I mean, don't be afraid to declare emergency. You just are going to have to explain yourself. But if you have the documentation, that should be no big deal. I think if I was an instrument pilot, maybe at that point that might have been a feather in my cap, because I would have had probably a more direct routing from navigation aid to airport or something like that. I might have been a little bit closer to that Jackson airport versus using a VFR navigation. I was just a little bit further away. And that 1 or 2 miles might have got me close enough where I could have maybe potentially scraped a little bit of distance off and been closer to that airport. But other than that, I mean, I think I did everything pretty good.
Well, it seems to me you made all the right decisions, and we're here talking about it, so obviously you did.
We are. I hope that something like that doesn't happen to anyone else as they're flying. But it is not that unusual, if you rack up a lot of hours, and you do just have to be spring loaded for that. And other than that, I would say just, obviously keep practicing those procedures. And when you talk about that engine out right before you enter a runway, really think about it. Really, really think about it. Fortunately, I was at 10,500 feet. I had plenty of time to make a decision, and if I was lower, it would have been, a different outcome perhaps.
Yeah. And I'll bet Hirschman gave you a pat on the back too, right?
He did. Oh, yeah, one more thing. I should let you know. Yeah, one more thing. Yeah, Hirschman did give me a pat on the back. And the messages started flying on the Mooney Digest, like, immediately. That was even back before the people were all over social media. But the chat digest just lit up. And I had forgotten to tell my brother, Martin, in Atlanta, that I had this little incident, and we were so much going on, and getting the rental car, and driving back over to Shreveport after they towed the airplane to the Jackson Airport, where it was basically impounded. So the AP picked up, the Associated Press picked up the story from the Jackson Clarion Ledger. It was on the Metro front, a picture of me, helping wrangle this airplane onto a flatbed. And the Associated Press picked it up, and the Atlanta Journal-Constitution ran that story. And then my brother found out about it because he read the paper, and he was unpleased. So I need to apologize to my brother Martin to this day. He was not pleased that he learned about my airplane emergency through the news media, despite my efforts.
Well, sort of a double whammy there. Not only did they read it that way, but it was the AP.
That's
Unipresser.
That's right. I'm a long-time United Press International, a long time ago staff photographer, and I still do a lot of contract work. You're right. It was the AP that hit me after that. But they did a good job with the story. And another kind of funny thing, I was, because I called my boss at the time at the Atlanta paper and said, hey, Minla, that was her name. I called Minla, said, hey, I'm okay. I just want you to know in case you hear about this, I'm okay, blah, blah, blah. And she said, great. I'm glad you called. Thank you, for talking to us. Hold on. Saeed on the night desk wants to talk to you. He's writing a news story about your experience. I'm like, wait a minute. I don't know that I can do that. So, but I gave Saeed just the most basic information. And they had a little bit of sidebar to go with that too. But it's a key takeaway. Don't forget, people are watching you now, even now more so than before.
Oh, yeah.
So watch what you're doing and be careful about that. And then let your relatives know as soon as you can. You don't need to surprise them on something like that.
Yeah, no, everything's all over social media, so yeah, let the folks know. Hey, well, Dave T., a great story. Thanks for sharing it with us and some lessons for everybody in that. Appreciate it, buddy.
All right, Warren. I hope to see you in person real soon and, go flying with you again. Thanks again.
Okay, take care.
Bye bye.